everything changed because I felt love for myself. And what I've realized after, writing the book and talking to thousands of people about forgiveness is that we don't know how to feel love and compassion for ourselves. We're not taught that. Most of us aren't taught that. It's very, very rare, even for parents today, to purposefully teach their children how to express love and tenderness and compassion towards the self. And that was the first time in my life that I'd ever felt it. I literally spent every moment that I remember, and this is not true because when we're tiny, we're innocent, but I hated myself. And that's the only feeling I knew. That's the only relationship I had with Emily, was absolute contempt and hatred for myself.
That was Emily Hooks, and this is the SHAIR Podcast.
It's time for the SHAIR Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host,
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the SHAIR Podcast, and today we have Emily J. Hooks joining us on the show, and what an amazing story Emily has. Emily is the author of The Power of Forgiveness and also the founder of the Forgiveness Academy. She's an amazing woman who helps thousands of people today change their lives through the power of forgiveness. But prior to becoming an author, a public speaker, a forgiveness coach, and the founder of the Forgiveness Academy, her life was a complete disaster. Emily was a heavy methamphetamine user and surrounded herself with some of the most dangerous people you could even imagine, and put herself and her family at great risk. Today, Emily goes into detail about her horrific battle with drug addiction and her amazing and transformational journey into recovery. You do not want to miss this episode. It is absolutely breathtaking. So let's dive into Emily's story, but first, a quick message from our sponsor, Organifi. Organifi is an organic superfood supplement that takes 30 seconds to make with no blending, no juicing, and no cleanup. Organifi is a coconut and ashwagandha-infused green juice that is gluten-free, soy-free, dairy-free, vegan, and absolutely delicious. My wife and I drink it every single day. We absolutely love it. We've noticed a significant difference in reduced stress, in improved digestion, improved mental clarity, and it boosts our energy levels. So not only is it organic and upgraded with 11 superfoods, if you order now, you're going to get 20% off your order by using promo code SHAIR, SHAIR. So go to the Organifi website, www.organifi.com. Organifi is spelled ORGANIFI, and make sure to put in your promo code SHAIR, SHAIR, and get 20% off your order today. And guys, a quick reminder to please remember to subscribe to the SHAIR Podcast. If you have an iPhone and you listen on iTunes, make sure to click subscribe when you listen to the show. You're going to get a brand new episode downloaded onto your phone every week with a little reminder that lets you know that the SHAIR Podcast just launched its latest episodes. Plus, it's the best way to rank on iTunes. When you subscribe to a show, it increases your ranking in iTunes. And my goal is to have the SHAIR Podcast as the #1 recovery resource and podcast in iTunes. So please subscribe, and while you're at it, leave us a 5-star rating and review so I can read it on the next episode of the SHAIR Podcast. And speaking of iTunes reviews, I've got a spectacular one for you guys right now. And this one comes from Shauna Beeves. And she writes, "Love it. As someone who suffers from social anxiety, the SHAIR Podcast has helped me tremendously. When I first quit drinking, the thought of walking into a meeting terrified me. I scoured the internet to read the stories of recovering alcoholics and addicts. My husband discovered the SHAIR Podcast and told me that I'd love it. Boy, was he right. I immediately began binge listening to multiple episodes daily. I started learning tools and became familiar with different paths of recovery and the inner workings of programs such as AA. Since I no longer had a fear of the unknown, I actually felt comfortable enough to go to a meeting, and then another, and another. Never in a million years would I have imagined getting the nerve up before. I've only gone to a few, but I'm proud I got my foot in the door, even though I sat silently. I'm still too scared to speak in front of others, but guess what? There's a private SHAIR podcast addiction recovery group on Facebook. Another godsend for people like myself. I can communicate with others, give and receive support without feeling pressure. It is a great community of caring people, and seeing the post on my feed keeps me motivated. I'm so grateful for the SHAIR podcast and Facebook group for helping me on this journey. On July 19th, I will have 8 months. It blows my mind. From the bottom of my heart, thank you, O. Give yourself a big pat on the back because you're helping a lot of people kick addiction's butt. HP, baby. Oh my God. It's just too much. I'm overwhelmed and over the moon and so grateful. Shauna, thank you for that amazing and heartfelt review. It's what keeps this whole thing going. And it's on a daily basis. I'm connected with so many people now on that Facebook private group. And, I haven't mentioned it before because I don't like to mention people that are in the private Facebook group by name. But I'm truly moved by the people that are in there doing this just tremendous amount of service. So I'm only going to read their first name. So if you're in there and you're struggling, here's the people that you can reach out to. Jude W., Derek S., Joe B., Gabrielle R., Nora Q., Craig M., Damian W., Rebecca B., Rebecca M., Sally C., Christopher Lee. I wish I could list more, but there's just not enough time, and these people are just standouts. They're unbelievable. They do so much service, and I just want to express my love and gratitude for each and every one of you. And I know that the other members in there feel exactly the same way I do. I cannot do this alone. I need your help, and we're doing it. God bless you guys. HP, baby. So if you're struggling out there and you haven't joined the Facebook private group yet, then please get over to Facebook, go to the search bar, type in SHAIR, SHAIR, private group, and jump in there. We're waiting for you. And for those of you that continue to support the SHAIR podcast with your donations, thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's amazing. They've actually started to come in a little bit more. So thank you guys, all of you, for donating and supporting the show. And little by little, it becomes easier and easier to support the show 100%. But we're not quite there yet. And if just 1% of our listener base would donate $5 a month to the SHAIR podcast, we'd be completely self-supporting. So if you've got the wherewithal to do so and you love the podcast, then please go to the SHAIR podcast website and start donating $5 a month to the SHAIR podcast today. Now, a quick message from Transitions Daily and then on to the show. Would you like to join a free, anonymous online group that offers a daily topic email with popular recovery resources accompanied by a secret Facebook group for discussion? Then go to dailyaaemails.com for more information about Transitions Daily. And don't forget to share dailyaaemails.com with friends, in meetings, and with sponsees in recovery. Hey, Emily, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's absolutely a pleasure to be here. I love your show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Oh, man, I love it. So how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling very, very grateful. I'm grateful to be here, and I've had a great day. So thanks for being a part of it with me and allowing it for me to be a part of it with you.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure, and it's also an honor and a privilege. We are off to a great start. So, folks, today we have Emily Hooks joining us on the SHAIR podcast, and Emily is the author of The Power of Forgiveness, a guide to healing and wholeness. Emily is a forgiveness coach and the founder of the Forgiveness Academy. Her mission is to share the power of forgiveness with each and every one of us. Emily did not earn a PhD and study human behavior for 20 years to get where she is today. Instead, she forgave herself. And as a result, everything in her life transformed. Does that sound about right?
That sounds exactly right.
Wonderful. So first of all, tell us a little bit about what your normal daily routine looks like, including recovery.
Yes, absolutely. There is. You're right. I am extremely busy since the book came out. And frankly, the writing and publication process of that has been one of the biggest challenges I've faced in my career. So the last 9 months, while from the outside looks amazing, it's actually been challenging, and it's required that I up my self-care game significantly. So, I meditate every day. I pray every day, many, many times every day. And I make a point, more so than I ever have, to cultivate and really nurture the relationships in my life, because that's where I get the fire.
The fire to
fuel my motivation.
I got you.
People ask, why do you do what you do? And there are many answers to that question, but one of the answers is to build security and beauty and comfort for my son and his family. So I try to make sure that everybody around me knows how much I love them and how much I appreciate them.
Now, this whole concept of being a forgiveness coach, forgive me, but it's the first time I've heard of it.
I made it up.
Okay, excellent. I like that. Innovation at its finest.
Yes.
So tell us how you came up with that, the idea for, becoming a forgiveness coach, and the book and what you do.
It's actually kind of a miraculous story. I'll back up just a little bit so you have some context. I've been clean in recovery for 15 years, and a lot of that was just building security and stability in my life. About 4 years ago, I decided to get my MBA. So I left all my stability and security, and I went and did that. And after I graduated, there were a lot of personal changes in my life, a breakup, my son moved back home. And so I didn't find the job that I was looking for because I was handling a lot of other things. And I was in a book club with some people that I know through my church, actually. And we were reading a book called The 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity. And one of the laws is forgiveness. And we started talking about it in the book club. And I was like, wait a minute. That's not my understanding of forgiveness. This is what I believe forgiveness is. And at the end of the meeting, one of the women came up to me and said, would you help me forgive my mother? And I said, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I was working as a freelance writer at the time, and I had some flexibility. So we started walking around Town Lake in downtown Austin. And as a result of those conversations, I wrote a curriculum and the book within a few months. So it was one of those sort of things that, just happens. Yep. It just flowed out of me. And what's interesting is I lived forgiveness. It is the foundation of my recovery and has been for 15 years, but I'd never had a conversation with anybody about it. So I had all of this sort of comprehensive and thorough knowledge and understanding of the process that I went through, and I read many, many, many books about it, not specifically about forgiveness, but spiritual texts and the big book and lots of resources. And so, here I am now, and I talk about forgiveness all of the time. I travel around the U.S. and speak on it. I do workshops. I work with individuals and groups, and it's like I've known it forever. So it's fascinating that, the reality is I started having this conversation 18 months ago. 18 months ago? Yeah.
How long did it take you to write the book?
2 months.
Oh, my God.
I know. It's truly, truly a miracle. And,
yeah.
I read the book, and, this is not at all a vanity statement. And I cry sometimes because I'm just like, wow, where did that come from? like who knows that? I'd never thought about it the way that it's written in the book until it was written. And now it's just, my sister came to one of the workshops that I did about a month ago, and she's like, it's like you've been doing it forever. Yeah. There are no questions that I can't answer. And so it was always in there, just, as a result of my personal practice. It just wasn't ready to come out until last year.
Wow. There's so much divine intervention that happens in our lives. And for you, it was just a big epiphany that allowed you to just run with it and accomplish such a huge task that so many of us want to do. and you did it in 2 months, which is, as far as I'm concerned, higher power. It's in there, right? You're just you're seeking. We're all seeking. Whenever we're in a quandary, the first thing many of us hear is go inside.
Right.
Seek the answers, they are within. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
But that is it's so true. It's all right there if we can just tap into it. And which is, let me just lead into the next question, because that's really important as well. You touched on it a little bit, but it seems like you're probably pretty connected. So how do you maintain your spiritual condition, that conscious contact with a higher power?
Well, over the years, it has sort of become the framework through which I live. And so it's where I start. Everything else that happens in life happens through that filter for me at this point in my life, which doesn't mean I go around, speaking about it all the time, but it's what drives the decision making. And the choices, even the data sets that I work with are all filtered through my faith and through my understanding of what's true and right for me in the world. And I'd like to be clear, I don't know what's true and right for another person. I just know that my body and my spirit tells me very clearly when something is right and when something is wrong. So that's how it is. And I nurture that with faith community, and with meditation and prayer and reading. I've read pretty much every spiritual text that's ever been written, truly. Right now I'm reading a book called A Course of Love, which is similar to a sequel to A Course in Miracles.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And that's deepening my understanding, so I count on those resources that are out there to help deepen my faith and guide me.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. So tell us how old you were the first time you drank or used drugs, and more importantly, how did they make you feel?
So, I'd like to just set that up by talking a little bit about what happened in my childhood, because it'll make this even more poignant, I think, for the listeners. So when I was a little girl, when I was 7, my father kidnapped me and took me out of the country and hid me from my family for 3.5 years. During that time, he was abusive. He was not a well man, and nor was his family. And his family inflicted essentially psychological torture on my mother during that time. Laws changed. So at the time, this was in 1979, it wasn't illegal for a mother or a father to essentially abduct a child. But that changed in March of 1982. And in May of 1982, felony kidnapping charges were brought up against my father. And my mother came to the UK on July 4th, actually, in 1982, and kidnapped me back, which was a very heroic and beautiful thing to do, and quite adventurous. There was a night in jail and police chases and all of these great stories to write about. But the impact on me was significant, as you can imagine. I left a life that I knew two times with the clothes on my back in 12 years. So I came back to the U.S. and I never was able really to reintegrate. My mother and I had some very real challenges in our relationship. In fact, her relationship drove most of the decision making that I made up through me getting clean 15 years ago. Basically, I was trying to make her pay for my perception of the mistakes that happened as a child. And I think that's a really, really common thing that happens for people, for addicts in particular. So the first time I drank was New Year's Eve. And I think I was 14. And I drank to the point of being completely obliterated. My sister was there and she threw me in a cold shower, and I kept trying to jump off a cliff and jump into the lake. And it was a grand start to a long career. And at that point, everything changed because I didn't feel the existential pain and confusion of living that I'd felt since I was 7. I mean, it's hard to, really allow ourselves to get present to the terror that a 7-year-old would feel being in a different country with a crazy man. And don't get me wrong, my father loved me and he, he did his best, but he was just not a well person. And I was terrified. I wanted my mother desperately, as a 7-year-old would. And that's the pain that I felt up until that moment.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
So here's what I'd like to do at this point, Emily. I'd like to turn the show over to you, and I want you to share your story with us.
Okay.
The battle against drugs and alcohol, the wreckage it caused in your life when you hit rock bottom, and then finally your journey into recovery up until today. And I'd like you to include the part in your life where you realized that you needed to forgive yourself. So obviously that's going to be, right at the end of your story, so that we can get a better idea of where all the, the concept for the book comes from. All right. So Emily, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I just want to start by saying this is not a story that I've ever really told before. So we're just going to see where it goes together.
All right. Just bring some higher power in here and he'll guide you through it.
Yes, indeed. So after that initial New Year's Eve, I very quickly started discovering all of the possibilities with regard to not feeling the pain that I felt. And I tried everything as soon as I found out about it, if I could get access to it, I would try it. I started smoking weed, and I smoked weed for most of my childhood and early adult life. In high school, I was introduced to meth for the first time, and we all have that thing, right? That's like, oh, this is what it feels like to be invincible. Yes. So that was what it was for me. And, in between my junior and senior year, I fell deeply, deeply off the deep end with my best friend at the time. I lived in my car. This was the first time I was homeless. And just sought more drugs. That's all I wanted, was just more meth. And we were approaching the end of the summer, and we decided that we were going to go down to the high school and spray paint. And so, gosh, I hope she doesn't get mad at me for telling this story. I guess I just won't mention her name, but
yeah, let's just change the names to protect the innocent here.
Yeah,
but tell the story.
So we'd been up probably for a week. I don't know how long. In the stories in my mind, it's a month, but I probably wasn't that long. So we got some spray paint, and somehow it was easy to get back then. And we drove up to the high school. It was probably a week before school was supposed to start. And I started spray painting on the sidewalk in front. And this is so cliche, but rock and roll high school. That's what I was spray painting. Very, very large, at the entrance of the high school. And, it wouldn't be a great story if the cops didn't pull into the parking lot. So the cops pull into the parking lot and pull up behind the car. We saw them. And so we ran over to the car and threw the stuff in the back of the car and got in, and they walked up. But they didn't see the graffiti. They just saw us acting, like we were up to no good.
Right.
And I grew up in a small town, and so he didn't even ask for our ID or anything, but somehow he knew who we were. So later, he obviously found the graffiti and issued warrants for our arrests through the judges. I don't know which judge it was, but anyway. And this sort of was a technique in a small town in the United States to get us in there. And so there was a warrant for my arrest, supposedly, and we went into the judge's office and they did an intervention, and they said, either you go to jail or you go to rehab. So in, I think it was September of 1988, I went to rehab for the first time, and it was, one of those old school rehabs, like a hospital. And I had to wear paper for like a week because they thought I was going to fly. And my best friend actually opted to go with me, which was really, really interesting. And so she came in with me. She wasn't coerced into going, but she did go. And she was in there for probably 25 or 30 days, I'm guessing. And I stayed in whatever the maximum amount of time was. And they didn't really release me with much optimism. I was a broken spirit at that point in my life. And I was really, really lost. So I got out and I got high within the first 24 hours. And then I kind of realized that, I needed to make a major change. So I heard an ad on the radio for a job in California selling magazines. And so I responded to the ad and I drove to a hotel room to interview for this job. And they said, sure, absolutely, we'd love to hire you. I just turned 18. You had to be 18 to do it. My best friend was 17 still at the time. And she said, well, I'll come after I turn 18. And so they said, yes, well, you'll live in a hotel with all the other people that sell magazines, and we'll give you money for a bus ticket. So that was my break. And let me just back up and say, during the time between rehab and leaving, which I think I left in July the next year, we got into hallucinogens. So I did tons and tons of LSD during this time. And I started losing my mind a little bit, I think. And as happens when you do that much of something like that in a short period of time. And ecstasy and that kind of stuff, that was new for me. So I get on a bus and I take the bus out to California, and the company that I worked for, the guy that I worked for, his name was Bobby Unger. He was from the streets of Philly. He drove a gold Jaguar with a license plate that said, "Why are you poor?" Yeah, he was a big guy, like 6'7", gold pinky ring, gold chains around his neck. He was like a pimp, but
like a pimp.
Maybe he was a pimp. I don't know.
That's the picture I'm getting.
Yeah. Well, all I did was sell magazines in parking lots, but there were a lot of pretty young people and attractive young people that lived in the hotel, and the front was at least that we sold magazines. Mm-hmm. And one of the policies was no drugs. So it was really, really helpful. It was exactly what I needed, actually. So I stayed out there for a few months and I did that. And it really got me back on my feet. Just breaking the cycle. You can't overstate just how powerful that can be when it's, and all you need is a moment, just a moment of clarity. And then you take a bold action, and it can make such a difference in our lives. And I'm not short on bold action. So I did that for a few months. Go ahead.
No, it's absolutely true. That's one of the things that I always say. There is that fleeting moment in your life where a light bulb goes on. And when it happens, you need to take action immediately. Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more. That's one of the many ways God communicates with us. It's just, hey, here's an opportunity.
Yep.
So I did that for a couple months and I got homesick. And so I came back to Texas. I'm basically from Texas, and I moved in with my sister and I got a job. And then I got pregnant with my son, who is 26 now. And obviously that changed my life in really big ways. He's absolutely the best thing I've ever done. So Yeah, he's my angel.
I understand. I got one of those too.
Yeah, it's like, wow, you're a big ball of miracles and blessings and opportunities to learn.
Yeah, they are.
So he was born, and I worked lots of jobs when he first came along, mostly waiting tables and that kind of stuff. I smoked a lot of weed when he was young. Drank quite a bit actually during that time. But I was functioning pretty well, pretty well. I mean, certainly not to my potential. But I was managing well enough for nobody to, be really, really mad at me, which I guess was my metric. So I did that for a few years, and then we started moving a lot. So one of the consequences of the trauma that happened in my childhood is that I get ants in my pants very easily, and I am constantly wanting to relocate. And actually, I calculated it. I think in the first 10 years of my son's life, we moved like 23 times or something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. Not the most stable environment, but we were best friends, so that helped. So I got ants in my pants, and we moved a few times, and we ended up moving back to my hometown, which I hadn't been back to since I left for California, and I was doing a lot of drugs, and it was not a good idea. And of course, I didn't know that at the time. We did it for financial reasons. We're closer to my parents, and I was a single mom. It was not easy to be a single mom. And I also wanted to start college. So we moved back to my hometown, and I started studying geology and environmental science at a university not too far away. And I very slowly started sort of ramping up on the alcohol and weed consumption. And then when I was 27, I believe, 26 or 27, I met a younger guy. He was 21 at the time, very, very good looking, and wild and crazy. He was from out of town, and we started hanging out and dating. And he went, during the time we were together, he went down to Mexico and got arrested and ended up spending like 4 months in a Mexican prison.
Ooh.
Yeah, I went down and visited him down there. Talk about
oh my God,
a nightmare. So during that time, the reason this is relevant.
Did you take your son?
No.
Oh,
No.
Thank God. No. I had to ask.
No. So during that time, he got addicted to heroin. And the environment he was in is practically indescribable. There was no furniture. The prisons down there are guarded by prisoners with machine guns. So it's basically a giant facility for organized crime. And he was probably one of the very, very few non-Mexicans in the prison. And he was a young, attractive man. So I don't know all the details, but I do know he got addicted to heroin while he was there. And when he got out, he came back to stay with me and my son. And he started at that point doing meth. And I hadn't seen or touched meth since before I left for California when I was 18. One of the moments in time that really has had the biggest impact in my life was the moment that I decided to shoot up for the first time. And prior to writing this book, I was writing a memoir about my life. I'm still working on it on the back burner, but this moment in time is one of the reasons that I stopped writing that, because what I realized, people want to know, this happened, why it happened, and what it led to. And the reality is, if we're honest with ourselves, the reason that we do things, it's never that simple. There are always many, many reasons why we do the things that we do. And after a lot of reflection and willingness to explore that moment in time, which I can see as clear as day in my mind's eye right now, there were many reasons, at least 8 different reasons that I did it. Some of them spiritual. I had legitimate, conscious, spiritual decision-making going on. And I also had codependency going on. And I also had real fear about what was going on in my life. And my son had just turned 7. And looking back on it many, many years later, after I started recovery, I realized, of course I was terrified. I didn't know how to parent a 7-year-old, right? I don't know what the life of a normal 7-year-old looks like. I've never lived it. So there was a lot going on in that moment in time, but as much as he didn't want me to do it, I was adamant that I wanted to do it. I was super crystal clear, no pun intended, that that I wanted to shoot up. And so I did. We did it wrong. He heated it up the first time and it crystallized. It was terrible, painful. And, but we learned quickly how to do it together. And, my life just fell apart very, very, very quickly after that. My parents took custody of my son within a year. I was homeless. I had lost all of my possessions to my drug dealer. Whatever his name was gone. And I was living in my car and just basically bouncing around, searching for dope. And I lived in parking lots and rest stops and random people's houses, trying to stay awake to be safe. And I can't tell you how many times I got robbed, because I would fall asleep and, really
Right.
Every time I fell asleep, somebody robbed me, essentially, which is why my car was often a better option. But you can't get dope in your car. Right? You have to be with people. So I met some extraordinarily dangerous people during this time. And, they were my people. They were my people. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest gifts that I have from this period in my life is that I learned what empathy is. And that's one of the 5 competencies that I teach in my book. If you believe there's something you're not capable of doing, you're just fooling yourself. You're just fooling yourself because you don't know what you would do if the circumstances of your life were different. And these people that I was with had extraordinarily tragic lives. I mean, there was one guy that I hung out with who was born into a satanic cult. He was having sex with his mother and doing heroin by the age of 6.
Oh my God.
What do you expect from that person? People think that they're different than the people that scare them the most. And the reality is they're only different by the circumstances of their life, not by their humanity. We're all exactly the same kind of human.
Wow.
So that's the kind of people I spent, the next 3.5 years with. And, let's see, in 1999, I decided that I needed to die. I wanted to die. I tried many times to kill myself. I almost died overdosing, shooting up cocaine earlier that year. It was a terrifying experience. But after my parents took custody of my son, I tried multiple times to commit suicide. The first time I blew the pilot light on the stove in my house out and went to sleep. And during that experience, I left my body and I was floating over my body, and my mom and my son walked into the living room and found my dead body. And I got to see their response. And it's hard to talk about, but, you can only imagine being able to see the moment when your child finds your dead body. He was not okay. And my mother was both not okay and trying to be okay for him.
How old is he?
At the time he was, 8 or 9.
God.
Now, to just keep in mind, this is just a dream. That didn't actually happen.
It's a nightmare. That's what it is.
Yes. I think some people call it a near-death experience. I don't know what the technical qualifications for that are, but so I woke up and I realized at that moment, what drug addicts do is, and people, they're like, how can you be so selfish? How can you, not be okay for your kids? And the reality is there's a point in time when you're really, really, really sure. There was a point in time when I was really, really, really crystal clear that he was better off without me. And that everybody was better off without me. And even though he had the protection of my parents as his primary caregiver, even the drama around the mistakes that I was constantly making and the promises I was constantly breaking was hurting him. And I was really sure that the world would be better off, that he would be better off if I was gone. And that dream showed me that wasn't true. So I came back and who knows? I don't know. I probably stayed clean for 48 hours or something. I can't remember what happened after that. But a few months later, after my parents filed formal custody papers against me and actually had me served in my backyard, that moment when that happened, when I opened that piece of paper and read the court documents, was one of those defining moments when you feel like your body is dissipating. You're just, nothing in the world matters anymore. And so in August of that year, I drove out to a dry riverbed and tried again to kill myself, and had what I would call a near-death experience, where I had a conversation with something in another realm. It wasn't really a religious experience because there was no religious symbology. Symbology, is it? Symbolism. Thank you. I was like, that's not quite the right word. Symbolism in it, but there was white light and a conversation and an understanding. And the most powerful thing that happened in that moment, and it's the reason that I do the work that I do today, one of the reasons that I do the work that I do today, is that I had an experience of absolute peace where all of the suffering left my body. And I felt like the perfect expression of me inside my own skin. And I can remember that, like, on a constitutional level. And what I believe to be true is that's our potential. That's not only my potential, but it's everybody's potential. And forgiveness is how we get there. And so at the end of that conversation, I was told to come back, and I came back. And I got in my car. I looked for a pen to write down what had happened, because I knew I would forget very, very soon. And I did. I remember part of it, but I can't remember the details of the conversation, or really what the entity looked like. And I couldn't find a pen. And I started driving, and I called my drug dealer in a complete and utter panic. And I said, I don't have any money, but you have to help me. You have to help me. You have to help me. And just completely fell apart. And she showed up and hooked me up and said, "You got to get your shit together." And I said, yeah, I know. Then, I'll be better after this. And I got high and started driving again, and, kept on plowing forward. The ironic and unfortunate thing, well, it's not unfortunate because everything happens as it should, but the ironic thing that happened as a result of those failed suicide attempts is I realized that I'd failed at something. I realized that I was going to have to live with the pain of existence because I couldn't die. I thought, that's, so many addicts think that they're, we think that if we just try hard enough, we'll die, right? If we just get high enough, we'll die. It's in the back of our mind.
Yes.
It's in the back of our mind,
We hope for it.
We hope for it. We pray for it. We're waiting for it. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's hard to do. I'm just telling you, I don't think that we get to choose that. I think there's something else going on. I don't think we get to decide when that happens. And so that created for me in my life an additional sense of powerlessness, ironically. So I started hanging out with even more dangerous people. I thought if I can't do it, then somebody else was bound to do it. I started living in another town. I met a friend who was very wealthy, and she let me live at her beautiful lake house. And just so happened there was dope everywhere around us. There's a lot more to that story, but that's for another time. And so I was kind of living the high life, no pun intended, because I was still a junkie. But I had this nice house to myself, and I looked like,
oh my God,
it was. I mean, it's better than living in your car, but it didn't last for a terribly long time because she realized at some point that I was extremely, extremely broken. So I lived out there for a few months, and while I was out there, I met a lot of very connected and dangerous people. And I don't want to go, too much into all of that for maybe obvious reasons, but I started dating a guy, and he was a meth cook, one of many in a group. And we dated for about a year. And then on a fall day in, I think it was 2001, I called him stupid. Actually, I said, "You're so fucking stupid." And he went into a rage that I'd never seen in another person. And my father was a pretty rageful person. And he tried to kill me. He came really, really, really clean to my bed and tied a scarf around my neck. I bit through my tongue and went unconscious. He thought I was dead. That's the only reason he stopped. And again, I regained consciousness. And the good news about that is it marked the beginning of the end. I'm not sure that I ever shot up after that day. I can't remember doing it. I still consumed meth, but I think that's probably about the time I stopped shooting up.
Wow. Jesus.
Yeah.
Man, you have got a powerful story. I'm sorry to interrupt there, but I'm just, wow. Yeah. Please continue.
You're so funny. You're so funny. Thank you. Yeah. So a little while after that, we were at somebody's house in another town, and we had been intimate. And after that, he sat on my back and he started drawing on my back with a Sharpie. And I was sort of in and out of consciousness a little bit, and I fell asleep. And when I woke up, I went I stood up and I heard people talking in the living room. This was a friend of his, whose house we were at. And as I walked past the mirror, I turned around, I noticed the drawing on my back, and it was like a full body back tattoo. I mean, it was completely, he doodled over the expanse of my back, which was tiny because I was like 95 pounds, but still. Oh. And in the middle, it said, "Treat me like a queen."
Oh.
And
interesting.
Yeah. And then I heard the voices in the living room. So I tiptoed over to the door, and I heard a conversation between him and another man that I didn't know, where he tried to sell me to him for money. And the other voice, who I didn't know, said, "No, I don't want her." And that's when everything changed. I realized in that moment, this was a moment of true grace in my life. This moment changed my life more than any other moment, because what happened was I embodied a sense of self-compassion, the type of compassion that we have for other people, for myself, because I saw myself as the object that they saw me as, but also as a human being. And everything changed because I felt love for myself. And what I've realized after, writing the book and talking to thousands of people about forgiveness is that we don't know how to feel love and compassion for ourselves. We're not taught that. Most of us aren't taught that. It's very, very rare, even for parents today, to purposefully teach their children how to express love and tenderness and compassion towards the self. And that was the first time in my life that I'd ever felt it. I literally spent every moment that I remember, and this obviously is not true because when we're tiny, we're innocent, but I hated myself. And that's the only feeling I knew. That's the only relationship I had with Emily, was absolute contempt and hatred for myself. Like I was in the way, like I was a mistake. And that changed in that moment. So everything changed. I went back to the tiny, hollowed out RV that my grandfather had put in a parking lot for me to live in. And I packed all my stuff. I went to that man that I'd been dating, and I told him I was moving to a town other than the town I was moving to. I packed my car. I went to my mom, and despite, all these years of lying and stealing, and never doing what I said I was going to do, I said, "Mom, I'm in danger. I need a credit card." And she gave it to me. And that also changed my life. And, I do like to say this, the unfortunate truth, in my opinion, is that the resources that we have make a big difference in where we end up in life. And I think that really and I don't talk a lot about drug policy, but I intend to more in the future. But I think that that's a really important thing that we need to know and that we need to accept, that, being able to provide the basic resources that people need saves lives. Because if she hadn't done that for me, I would have been stuck in that relationship and I would have died. I would have been dead. There's no doubt in my mind. So she did that. I went to that person and said, I'm leaving. And frankly, that's a little bit of a miracle because the situation that I'd gotten myself into was structured and organized, and they didn't have to let me leave, but he did.
Wow.
So I left, and I got an apartment, found a job. I'd been, to sustain myself during those times, because I was really, really stubborn. I would get a job and keep it for 3 days and then quit so I could go get high. So I'd get, so I had literally probably 50 jobs over those years, because you can always go into a gas station or a restaurant and, get a job doing something just to make $40, and then you've got enough gas money to get from, I take that back. You can't always do it, but I was able to pull it off most of the time. So, but I got a job and I kept it. And it was, a more real job. It was a hostess at a restaurant, but whatever, it was a place to start.
Right.
And I started focusing on some really basic principles, finding principles, learning what principles were, learning what integrity was. I literally had no idea what integrity meant until this point in my life. I started studying spiritual and religious texts, the Big Book. I started attending a spiritual community that was a reflection of who I believed I was, and as a result of my mystical and spiritual experiences. I had a pretty good understanding of that at this point. And one of the biggest things is I started being a service. Man, I realized that all of my suffering was a result of the preoccupation that I had with myself. I was always thinking about me, what was wrong with me and what was wrong with me in relation to the world. And when I stopped doing that, when I started focusing on helping other people and helping the communities around me, life got a lot more manageable. And it's still one of my core principles today is, try to suffer when you're not preoccupied with yourself. It's not actually possible. We might be of service in environments that, I volunteer at the local jail here. And that's an environment where people are suffering, but being of service in those environments isn't suffering. Right? You're creating space for other people to recognize that they're not alone. And that's a gift. That's not suffering. All the suffering is about when we're thinking about us. So those are, that's kind of how my recovery started is, focusing on being of service and finding a spiritual community and studying. And then I started systematically forgiving everyone in my life, including myself. And people say, why did you do that? And I say, because I tried everything else, how what I know from the book. And the answer is, I know it. The reason I did it is because I took death and drugs off the table and I had nothing left. I still was, people think that was a good time in my life. It was the most painful part of my life ever because I was still suffering and I had no way out. And I was trying to function in the world and trying to figure out how to be in the world. When you're that far gone, basic things like, I would get in my car and I would just start driving. I would have a plan and then I would just end up doing something completely different. People don't understand how crazy the mind gets, I made a rule, even if I had to write it down, where are you going and why are you going there? And then it was a rule. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. It was, and if I broke the rule, then I took note of that. And I said, no, you're going to do what you say you're going to do. And it was really, really, really basic at the beginning. For me, the two most powerful things I did was I started paying attention to what was going on around me in a really intense way. Because when we do that, then this is while I was still using, when we do that, we start to recognize what our real options are, because there aren't any people around us that are living outside of those options. You're not going to be the exception, right? So your life is going to look like their lives. Those are your options. So I started paying really, 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 really close attention to my options and, what life was really going to be like. And I just really allowed myself to get super present to that before I left the life. Yeah. And the second one I'm drawing a blank on right now, but it'll come to me in a second. Yeah.
Here I am on pins and needles here.
Yeah.
And the second one is?
Yeah, I can't remember it right now. So,
well, can I ask you real quick?
Yeah.
There is a process. Everything has a process.
Yes.
You said you systematically started to forgive everyone around you, including yourself.
Yeah.
Did you find that you needed to forgive yourself first before you started forgiving people, or did you start forgiving people and then realize that you needed to forgive yourself? How does that work?
I started forgiving other people first. I started specifically, my mother. There's a primary relationship outside of ourselves that is the reason we do the things that we do, period. It's very, very rare that that's not the case. And it could be something as silly as you really felt vulnerable when you were 3 and you asked her not to go to dinner and she went anyway, right? It doesn't have to be trauma. People say, what do you need to forgive? And you need to forgive the things that caused you harm, not the things that the world says caused you harm, the things that caused you harm. And that doesn't mean that it was intentional. A lot of the things that we forgive in life, the other people have no idea about that it ever even happened. But those moments happen in our lives. Forgiving people, the people in our lives, for the actions that impacted us. And I believe that it's important to start with that relationship, because if we start with self-forgiveness, what ends up happening a lot of times is we beat ourselves up more, because self-forgiveness requires that we're brutally honest with ourselves. And it's really hard to be brutally honest with yourself until you've cultivated a little bit of strength in the area of compassion and empathy and self-love and self-care. And so if we can start to heal our relationship to our relationships, and let me just say what I mean by that. Forgiveness is not about the other person. And this is a big distinction between making amends and forgiveness. I forgave my mother and everyone else in my life, and they didn't know about it until I wrote the book. And let me just say this, our relationships changed fundamentally in major, major ways as a result of me forgiving. And I never said, I forgave you. Because what do you hear when somebody says, I forgive you? You hear, well, I screwed up, you're judging me for something, right? Usually that's what we hear. Unless you're in a relationship where you're working together on that healing process. And even then the forgiveness happens within us. I don't encourage people to have that conversation because it can take away our power. We have the power to heal our heart and our relationship to our relationships. And that's where our true power is. Why did the relationship with my mother change when I forgave her if I never said anything to her? It changed because I stopped showing up as an asshole.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I stopped showing up with judgments about her. And eventually, with time, her defenses dropped and she was able to just be her. And now I can love her just the way she is, and she can feel safe in that. And that's been true for all of my relationships.
Well, it sounds like in the process of making amends, so you're mending the relationship by changing your behavior. So you've changed your behavior because your outlook, your perspective has changed towards the individual. In this case, it's your mother. So you forgive your mother, and so you look at her differently. And when you look at her differently, you act differently. Correct? Yeah. So in a sense, the relationship changes because you changed your behavior around her.
And expectations. Sometimes people don't change, right? Like the behaviors that she had that I resented, she still has.
Yes.
What changed is the way I related to them,
right.
The way I related to her. And that is in large part due to a change in expectation and realizing that other people's lives are not about us. None of them, not our kids, not our parents. We're all living our own lives and we're all the center of our own universe. And we should honor that. Like, why do I get to be the center of my universe and I need to be the center of hers too? That doesn't make sense.
No, but this is something that needs to be discussed and something that people need permission to feel that way. Because you're so intertwined between the relationship between your mother or your father or your sister or, whoever it is, that it sometimes becomes very difficult to know where the separation lies and where the guilt, where you don't need to feel guilty for feeling a certain way or acting a certain way or saying a certain way or protecting yourself. Because like you said,
protecting yourself,
no one around you is going to change. Or they might, but that's on them, right? As we go along in the process and we make changes, the key statement here would be the expectations. You can't expect that just because you're changing, that all of a sudden they're going to start changing. You just process it differently, right?
It's not just processing it. It's truly getting to a place. And this is the gift of forgiveness, one of the many gifts of it. When you truly forgive, which essentially, and I can give my definition of it, but on the most fundamental level, what forgiveness is seeing the same circumstances differently. That's it. That's all forgiveness is. It's the realization. And if you're a person of faith, it's the realization that we cannot know better than whatever that divine order is. And it's a true acceptance of the things that have happened in the past. And sometimes that gets a little sticky for people intellectually because they think, well, I don't accept that. That's not okay. And you're right. It's not okay if it was happening now, right? But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the past. And it's not rational to think that something that happened in the past is not okay because it's not happening now. How can it not be okay? It did happen. It happened. And there's nothing that we can do to change it. So it's the mental activity of a non-acceptance of what is and cannot be changed is futile. Yeah. And it creates suffering. And so forgiveness is finding our peace in that. And sometimes people get resistant to it because they think that means that they're going to be okay if it happens now. But actually, the opposite happens. Because when we learn to forgive others and when we forgive ourselves, we create better boundaries.
Yes.
We're more clear about what works for us and what doesn't work for us. And those things we don't even hesitate. Would I take that kind of shit from somebody today? No, absolutely. In fact, I would never even be that close in a relationship with somebody who had that potential.
Yes.
It's not like you just end up in the middle of, a war zone like that. You get there step by step.
Well, in the course of recovery, in whatever facet that is, in my case, it's 12 steps. And you've participated in 12 steps. There is those steps, and there is a process. And as you go through it, these things start to happen. This awareness, this ability to turn things over, this ability to forgive, this ability to make amends, to relinquish expectations, because we realize that having expectations. But all these things start to happen as the years go by, and we start to learn what things work for us, what makes us feel better as we move along in our journey. Because holding on to things from our past, and like you said, what happened, there's no denying it. What we do with that information now is the challenge.
Yeah.
Do we allow it to continue to wreak havoc in our lives? Do we hold grudges? Do we hold resentments? Do we continue to have this armament around us where we prevent loving, nurturing relationships to come in because we're still so afraid of the past? Or do we do the work that allows us to relinquish that?
Yeah.
I think that one of the more important things that I learned in my own recovery was everybody's another human being just like me doing the best they can. And I can't hold them to any sort of higher expectations or put anyone on a pedestal because I'm doing myself and them a disservice, correct?
For me, it's about realizing that when somebody does something that causes pain for me or for somebody else, they're not doing it to that person. Nobody ever did anything to hurt me. What they were really doing was acting out of the belief that they have about themselves. And that's why I did all of the painful things that I did as a parent. And I do want to definitely talk about self-forgiveness, but, when I realized that my intention was never to hurt my son or to hurt my parents or anybody else, on the most true level. Now, don't get me wrong. I thought I was trying to hurt my mother, but what I was really trying to do is like a 7-year-old, get her attention. And so I was trying to prove points about myself. Hurt people. That's why it happens. It's not because they're trying to hurt us. We're not trying to hurt others. We're trying to prove a point to ourselves, to validate that we're broken, to validate that we're flawed or that we're a mistake or that, we can't do life on life's terms. That's why we cause harm in the world, all of us. There's no exception to that. The 4 agreements, the third agreement is don't take anything personally. And that's what that means. It means that it's not personal. What other people do is not about you. Even a spouse, it's not about you. It's about them.
Right. And
when we realize that, when we create that space, then we can allow people to just be who they are. And in fact, for me, when I see somebody do something hurtful, or create distance or in relationship, I feel empathy for them. I feel the pain they must be feeling, or I imagine they must be feeling, to do something that would be painful like that.
You wrote the book 18 months ago and you got clean 15 years ago. You started the process of forgiveness pretty early on in your recovery, right?
Yeah, and practically immediately.
Okay. So there's 13 years, which leaded to the culmination of the book.
Yeah.
So in those 13 years, how did that process of forgiveness evolve? And then what kind of a message can you give to our newcomers who are beating themselves up right now? I lost my wife. I lost my business. I have nothing. I'm a piece of shit.
Yeah.
So first, what were those 13 years, the evolutions and the transitions that you learned about forgiveness? And then what's some practical, advice that we can give to our newcomers?
So the first question is a little bit hard to answer because I'll answer it like this. I'll tell you the process that I went through. I'll tell you the universal process that we go through as human beings when we forgive. And this was consistent with my experience. And in the book, it's outlined in 8 specific steps. The first step is to get present to the suffering that we feel, right? And we talked about that a minute ago. I got really, when we always do when we first get clean, right? That's where we end up, is just back where we started, which is an experience of the suffering. Mm-hmm. And maybe we're not even aware of it because for many, many people, they don't realize that that's where they're going. That's where they're trying to escape when they start the journey through addiction. So the first step is just to get clear on the pain that we feel. And by the way, this is the reason that most people don't truly, truly forgive, because it's painful. Forgiveness, the process of forgiveness is what it essentially is it's a process of self-actualization. So it's movement forward in our consciousness. And in the process, we are choosing consciously to move through hurt feelings, shame, anger, and resentment are the big 3, in favor of or in exchange for self-love, self-compassion, and empathy for other people. So it's not about letting go of the shame and the anger and the resentment. It's about moving into it. It's about honoring it. It's about allowing ourselves to get present to it, because what happens when we do that in the presence of love is it transforms into gratitude, because we learn and we realize that we get in touch with the pain behind the pain. You know, we don't start angry. We don't start ashamed. We start embarrassed. We start sad. We start feeling lonely or abandoned. You know, those very fundamental, tender, hurtful moments in life are where we all start. And when the access point to that is the anger, you know, that's where most of us are, is, you know, I'm really, really pissed off about life. And then we say, oh, this isn't safe. We shouldn't feel that way. But actually, it is safe. What isn't safe is our evaluation of it. Everybody on the planet gets angry. So it serves a purpose, right? It's a human condition. It has a reason to exist. It's not the anger itself. It's what we do with it that has the potential to be disruptive. And what we do with it is always based on what we think about it. So I shouldn't feel this way. This isn't safe. You know, this is bad. All of those judgments that we have about how we feel are the problem with how we feel. It's not. So when we get present to just the feeling and we stay present to it, that's how forgiveness happens. That's how all healing happens. It happens by nurturing the pain that we feel and just being present to it in the presence of love.
Yeah, there's those underlying feelings that we don't even realize, especially early on. Like you say, you know, you're angry, but you know, where does that anger come from? There's an underlying feeling that is, for example, hurt. You know, somebody hurt my feelings and I'm feeling vulnerable. And my way of battling that or combating that or dealing with it is through anger, because that's a much, much more powerful approach than saying, hey, you hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
But once that happens, once you can connect with that, then the dynamic of the relationship changes. If it's somebody that cares about you, they'll be like, I am sorry I hurt your feelings.
Right.
If it's somebody that doesn't care about you, they say, like, don't be a sissy. Right. And so that's where you can start to navigate where a relationship is going to go.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you know, but
I mean, that's
also,
the way.
we're all a bunch of 8-year-olds, though. You have to realize that they're not all of us, but I'm being tongue in cheek a little bit. But, you know, we have to create space by being an example to people about the alternative, because most people, you know, including some world leaders, are, you know, they're just a bunch of little kids running around in grown-up bodies, and they don't have the capacity to have true emotional intelligence and to recognize that they're doing what they're doing to play out how they feel about themselves. So I think, yeah, that's true. And we also have the choice to be an example for the people in our lives and to create space for people to feel safe, to be vulnerable in relationship by being that. And of course, at a certain point, if somebody can't honor that and reflect it back to you, then it probably isn't, you know, in your best interest to maintain that.
Okay.
But I think, because otherwise, how does the world become more forgiving, right? You know, if I spend my time talking to people who know how to forgive, if I spend time talking to yogis, and I love yogis, don't get me wrong, but if I spend all my time talking to highly evolved people about topics that they already understand, then the world doesn't become a better place.
Right.
So, like I said, we're all exactly the same, and I'm crystal clear on that. I really, really see that. I feel it, you know, when I see somebody struggling out there on the streets, I'm with them every single time. And that's an example of being emotionally aware that I was talking about, and of having empathy. I don't resist that. And I also don't get attached to it. So the other thing that happens is people all of a sudden, they feel the pain and they feel the sadness of another person suffering, and they get kind of wrapped up in it. You know, you don't want to get attached to the crappy feelings. You just allow them to come, and then you allow them to go. So I use meditations, and I have 2 on my website that create a structure for this emotional awareness where you can go into an experience of pain, experiencing trauma, and then move out of it purposefully, like 10 minutes at a time every day. And then you start processing it. And it is a process. It's just like building a muscle. Forgiveness is, you do the work every day, just like in the program. And with time, it becomes a natural response. It becomes a virtue or, a way of living. And that's my hope and my prayer is that that happens for as many people as it can, because it will change the way the world works. If we lived in a forgiving world. Right now, we live in a very unforgiving world.
Yeah, I was about to say that's pretty optimistic in the world we live in. I've said a million times, if everybody was working a 12-step program, things would be very, very different. But there is so much self-centered fear that just governs the planet. It's very difficult for these types of conversations to happen, especially in politics or in business,
policy,
where it comes to the need to get things done, and we don't have time for this. Mm-hmm. When it's time to get things done, so you disconnect from the human experience, and you move into the material, fear and consumption, which is what the world revolves around. But that's another conversation too. So before we veer too far, what's some good practical advice for newcomers?
Create some rules, your own rules. Not the program's got rules. Yes, not rules. They've got guidelines. They've got suggestions, and that's all good. And the community that the program offers is powerful and helpful. But create your own rules. What do you need? And I'm talking real simple things, like I talked about earlier. Like when I got in my car, I went where I said I was going to go. And that's not. Those aren't rules that I was doing for somebody else. I was doing it for me because I realized that I couldn't function in the world unless I stopped doing that. And some other rules: pay attention to what's going on around you. Pay attention to what's going on inside you. Always do what you say you're going to do. Try to meditate. I think that these rules are really very individual, and that it's the process of developing them that is powerful, because what we do when we reflect on what we need is we get to know ourselves. And if we can do that in a tender way, then we lay the groundwork for that self-forgiveness that you were talking about earlier. And by the way, self-forgiveness is the hardest type of forgiveness to do by leaps and bounds. There's no question about that. And the reason for that is because when we get present to the pain that we feel as a result of the pain, the hurt that we've caused in the world, it feels very sharp in the body. It feels, like we don't want to stay present to that type of pain. We don't want to stay present to the depth of the shame that we feel for, for hurting the people that we care the most about. And so we start judging it. And forgiveness is about allowing ourselves to just be present to that and to respond to it with the most tenderness that you can. And self-forgiveness is absolutely, without question, the most rewarding aspect of the process for me. It's been the most empowering, and it has created space for me to show up in life, in my skin, and just be me and say, hey, this is the deal. This is me. This is the best version of me today. And I'm sorry that happened, and let's move forward from here. And I just want to say this. I think it's really, really important, because what motivated me to forgive myself the very first moment 15 years ago, my son came home to live with me about 6 months after I left the town I was living in.
Okay.
And we had our challenges, as you can imagine. He was angry with me. And what I realized was, because I was supplicating and just, I'm so sorry and I love you so much, and crying and, just trying so hard to get him to know that I was different, right? And he's just trying to be a kid. He's like, oh, this sucks too. And what I realized was every time I told him I was sorry, what I was saying is there's something wrong with you. That's what we're saying to the people that we love. Every time we beg and plead for forgiveness, what we're saying is, if I hadn't done what I did, you would be different and it would be better. We're making ourselves very important in that scenario. And so what I realized was I had to forgive myself so that he would know he's exactly who he's supposed to be. I don't have that much power. I don't know what his journey is. I know that what happened is a part of it because it happened. And what that looks like moving forward is up to him. And that's not cold at all, by the way. If anybody hears it as cold, it's exactly the opposite. It's taking myself out of his business and honoring his humanity on the most fundamental level.
I never looked at it that way, saying I'm sorry. I learned early on that making amends and saying I'm sorry are two very different things.
Yes.
And you don't need to say anything.
Yeah.
All right. Your actions are always going to speak louder than words. So you can say you're sorry and still be an asshole.
Yeah.
Okay. And it means nothing. Right.
Sometimes it makes it worse.
Yes. Yeah. You're a sorry sack of shit. That's what you are. But, as you begin to change, you give them their space. You love them in that way. You love them enough to cohabitate and let the natural flow of the process impact the relationship. So yeah,
not making it about him. As addicts, we think it's about us, and it is about us if we're talking about our lives. But other people's lives, even our kids, it's not about us. It's not about us.
No, I agree. This has been very informative, and I really was excited to get you here because forgiveness is a tricky topic. And it's something that many of us have a really tough time tapping into, wrapping your head around, giving ourselves a break, allowing us to look at ourselves as not this, the giant of our dreams or the dwarf of our nightmares, bringing us down to earth and allowing us to be human just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And saying, you know what, you're right. This happened. What steps do I take now so that my life is different? Mm-hmm. And the first thing I have to do is forgive myself. So with that being said, can you please, Emily, tell us the best way for us to connect with you, to reach out to you, your website, your book? Please tell us what's the best way to find you.
Okay. So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Forgive Academy. I'm also on Periscope at Pathbreak. I have a private Facebook group called the Forgiveness Academy. If you just go to Facebook and type in Forgiveness Academy and search for closed groups, that's the best way to have daily access to me and other resources. There's also a public page for the book called the Power of Forgiveness book on Facebook. So there's lots of ways to get in touch with me. The Kindle version of my book is out now, and you can actually get a free download of the first 2 chapters by going to my website, which is emilyjhooks.com. It's emilyjhooks.com, and there's a free download. Just go in and sign up on the website, and you can read the first 2 chapters of the book. And if it piques your interest, if you think it adds value in your life, you can buy it on Amazon.com in both paperback and Kindle edition, and the audio version will be out in September.
Oof, excellent. There's plenty of us that are audio junkies. Totally. That's how I read all my books. I listen.
Yeah, I do both. I really do. Sometimes I drive a lot. I travel and speak a lot. So when I'm in the car, little Course in Miracles.
Yes.
It's good stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So Emily, we have now come to the end of the show, but before we close up, I'd like to ask you 5 questions about your early recovery that you can respond with inspiring and insightful answers for our newcomers. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's do this. So first of all, what was keeping you from getting clean or staying clean when you first got introduced to recovery?
I just wasn't ready. I didn't, I didn't believe a word of it. I thought everybody was full of shit and I was different.
I totally relate. That was my first go around. What a bunch of losers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I was introduced through the courts. So,
Exactly. So was I.
Yeah.
Go to those meetings. I'm like, oh, great. All right. So then number 2, at what point did you have a spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery when you accepted that you were powerless over drugs and alcohol, but for the first time had developed a hope that you could recover?
So I think we talked about my aha moment back in, I think it was 2001, 2002 maybe. I can't remember now. 2002, definitely. So that was a moment of awakening for me, for sure.
And what was it that happened again?
I thought I was going to die. The man that I'd been dating tried to sell me to somebody else. And I just had a moment of grace when I felt a sense of self-compassion and love that I'd never felt before.
Yes,
for
that's
myself.
Right.
Yeah.
That was one of the most powerful parts of your story. All right. Let me get back into the groove here. Okay. So then number 3, do you have a favorite book that you would recommend to our newcomers that you had read in early recovery, or, books that you would recommend now?
I think that has a lot to do with your worldview. What's powerful for you is going to be what rings true for you. Eckhart Tolle was a big influence in my life. The Power of Now was a super important book in my life. The Tao Te Ching is a very powerful, probably one of the most powerful books I've ever read. So I think it really depends on, what your fundamental beliefs are, and just start there. I can tell you a really good academically powerful book that relates to forgiveness is called Forgiveness is a Choice. It's by Dr. Robert Enright. If you have to choose between that and my book, you definitely want to get my book. I'm just kidding. He's a PhD research, the professor at the University of Wisconsin. So his book is very academic, but it's a great book. And what I like about that book is that and my book does this in chapter 1, but he spends a lot of time really outlining what forgiveness really is and what it really isn't. And that might sound fundamental, but it's absolutely important because we meet resistance. We say, I'm not going to do it because of this, because I'm condoning behavior, because it's going to happen again, and all these things. And we're confusing concepts when we do that.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we have 4 suggestions for books, right? One of which is, of course, yours, The Power of Forgiveness.
And I would like to say this about that. I have quite a few people in my groups who have been in recovery for a long time. And I've heard multiple people say it is, it's additive to the process. It's sort of a way. Somebody called it the missing piece, and I don't mean to imply there is a missing piece, but if there was a missing piece, my book is a very additive because it's written in a very similar way to the literature that people in the program are familiar with. Beautiful, because that's what we need. Congruency. Yeah. Yeah. You're not going to find you won't find anything that goes against that program in the book. Beautiful, beautiful. And number 4, what is the best suggestion you have ever received? Shut up and sit down. I get that one a lot. Yeah. Shut up and listen. Yeah, shut up and listen. It's tongue in cheek, but it's true because I'm my own worst enemy. Yeah. I really get quiet. Get quiet, no matter what it takes, even if it's for 1 second. It'll be the most powerful second of your day. If you just take a minute and shift from being the observed to being the observer, whether that's tuning into the birds singing in the background or watching your kids play, or smelling dinner cooking on the stove, just that one moment. That's the foundation of true recovery and healing.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautifully said.
Thank you.
So number 5, if you could give our newcomers only one suggestion, what would it be?
Pay attention. Pay attention. Pay brutal attention. I mean it, and what does that imply? Well, it implies that we're paying attention to the changes that are taking place. We're paying attention to how things in our experience are different than what other people say, and we're honoring that, and we're paying attention to what's similar, and we're paying attention to what makes us feel better, and we're paying attention to how life is changing and, how much safer we feel. And those moments of opportunity that we didn't see before. And for a lot of people, a part of paying attention is writing. And if that's a way to help you pay attention more, then I would recommend doing that too.
Beautiful, beautiful. Great suggestions, Emily. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been so much fun. It's been an absolute pleasure. It truly has. You're a pleasure to talk to, and I'm really happy to be a part of the show.
Well, I'm really grateful that you joined us. Your story, thank you for being so candid. It touched me. I was right there with you traveling along. It's funny. When I look at you, I see pictures of you. I can't even imagine that person. Yeah. I can't. Right. It's so difficult to even imagine that person because, your smile is electric, so.
No, thank you. Thank you. It's hard earned. I've been charging my batteries.
And it's so wonderful to see how amazing a life can just evolve so beautifully and so impactfully over the years. You just become an entirely different person. So again, that was, I thank you for joining us. So we now reached the end of our show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida.
Thank you for joining us on the SHAIR Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.theshairpodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then. The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not